États-Unis. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kirsten Hillman, Canada's Ambassador to the United States. It's a delight to have you here. You're so very well behaved. You were came right to silence when I got up here, so I appreciate that. I'm sure that that's the good disciplined nature that Minister Blair is used to in his contact with our armed forces here in Canada and around the world. So on behalf of the Embassy of Canada, I'm very grateful that you're here with us today, and the Atlantic Council, I'm very grateful for the partnership in presenting this discussion today, which I know will be very interesting for all of us. So you are very welcome here at the Embassy. We're going to hear some insights today from Minister Blair, Canada's Minister of National Defence, and then there will be an armchair discussion afterwards. You know, this meeting here today and having this discussion is very timely. Canada has just released a very important new defence strategy entitled Our North Strong and Free. It is not an aspirational document. It is a document that sets very clear commitments, and it is a list of what we plan to do, what we plan to acquire, and how we plan to operate in order to protect the sovereignty of Canada and promote global security and act in concert with our allies. We understand, and it's not lost on any of us, that there is a sharp increase in global instability and that global strategic threats, unfortunately, are on the rise. And we also understand as a country that we bring specific capabilities, specific expertise to the table, and we are committed to doing our best to make those contributions, not only to the protection of our own country, but to our cooperation and contribution with our allies. We understand that Canadian national security is also North American security, and North American security is essential for transatlantic security. So see, these I think are some of the themes that hopefully we will be discussing here today. The Minister and I and our delegation have had a busy day so far, including a meeting with Secretary Austin. And what struck me in that discussion, which was broad and wide-ranging, where we talked about things that we're doing together in the Indo-Pacific, in Europe, in Ukraine, in Latvia, concerns around the crisis in the Middle East. We talked about NATO, of course. We talked about NORAD. We talked about Canada's defense policy update, how we patrol the continent together in the seas and in the air and underwater. But what struck me about Secretary Austin through the course of this whole conversation is how he repeated pretty much at every turn when we were talking about these different topics that we are very lucky as neighbors to have built-in trust that has been gained over decades of working together, to have interoperability, and that in all of this work, we're stronger because we're working together. So today, I think hopefully we'll spend some time exploring some of that. Minister Blair is joined on stage by Ian Brzezinski, who is a senior fellow with Transatlantic Security Initiative in the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. So I look very much forward to this chat we're going to have today. I thank you once again for coming, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Minister Blair, who's going to make a few opening remarks. Minister.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. To everyone, welcome to the Embassy of Canada, and I would like to offer my sincere appreciation and thanks to the Atlantic Council for organizing this event. Canada has no closer friend than the United States, and our partnership stretches back generations. And this morning, as the Ambassador shared, I met with Secretary Austin at the Pentagon, and we, as she has indicated, had a very wide-ranging discussion about defense and security issues of concern to both of our countries. But throughout that conversation, there is an acknowledgement of the strong bonds that exist between our countries. The fact that we have not only an alliance, but a trusting relationship. Today in Canada, both Canada and the United States face a very significant and daunting list of challenges. Russia's brutal war in Ukraine is well into its third year, and conflict has now erupted in the Middle East, and at the same time, We are seeing certain adversarial countries such as China, which is increasing its military capabilities and its assertiveness. And in my own country, climate change is disproportionately affecting us as well, and in particularly in our Arctic, where we are seeing an increase in warming in our Arctic, which is 4 times the global average. This is making the Arctic far more accessible and vulnerable. And for many years, I think Canadians relied on the fact that because of our preferred geographic position, we were separated from conflict in the world by 3 oceans, one of which was mostly frozen. And we had the remarkable good fortune to be next to the most supportive of allies. But as Russia and China have been investing in new infrastructure in our far north, creating capabilities in the region, they've both shown a willingness to work together against our strategic interests. And together, this creates one of the most fraught and challenging security environments that Canada and the United States and all of our allies have seen for some time. And these threats require all of our countries to respond. And I hope you can see in our new defense policy update, that's what Canada is doing to our policy update entitled Our North, Strong and Free. Now, this policy is focused on protecting Canada and North America. Job number 1 is securing our North and doing our job of working with the United States to ensure continental security. It's also a policy which is backed up by major investment in our military. And with this policy, Canada is investing an additional $8.1 billion over the next 5 years and $73 billion over the next 20. Now, by 2029-2030, our defense spending is, with currently approved expenditures, is projected to reach 1.76% of GDP. Now, I hope that it's acknowledged that this is a significant step towards reaching our NATO commitment of 2%, a target for which Canada and all of our NATO allies have committed. Through this policy, we're acquiring new capabilities for the Canadian Armed Forces that will allow them to detect, deter, and defeat the new threats that we are facing. And we're investing in new maritime sensors, airborne early warning aircraft, long-range missile capabilities, a new fleet of tactical helicopters, a network of northern operational support hubs that will allow us to have our forces to maintain a greater year-round and persistent presence right across the Arctic and the North. I believe that these investments are going to enhance Canada's ability to defend our country, our Arctic sovereignty, and working in partnership with the United States, our continent. All of these expenditures articulated in this defense policy are fully costed and funded by our government. But let me acknowledge to you all, we're doing a great deal. We will have to do more. And in this document, we've also set out capabilities for which we have already begun to explore options, including a new fleet of submarines, modernized artillery capabilities, a modernized tank fleet, and more investment in integrated air and missile defense. In addition to this, we're putting our shoulders to the wheel and doing the necessary work to modernize our contribution to NORAD. 2 years ago, the Government of Canada announced an investment of nearly $40 billion to modernize NORAD, our greatest investment in NORAD in well over a generation. And with this commitment, we are ensuring that the Canadian Armed Forces will have the equipment, resources, and infrastructure that its members will need not only to defend our country, but to fulfill our obligation to our closest allies. And to monitor the continent, we need to make sure that we do this in lockstep with our American allies and friends. We are deepening our commitment to the extraordinary partnership, a bilateral command unlike any other in the world. We're building a new Arctic over-the-horizon radar capability that will improve how we detect threats in the north, and we're upgrading our infrastructure at 4 forward operating locations so that we can respond as required. We're investing in advanced capabilities for the Canadian Armed Forces that are going to enable us to better defend our country and our continent. And by being strong at home, it will also enable us to be strong for our allies around the world. Among the new investments is new Arctic and offshore patrol ships. We have acquired and signed contracts for a new fleet of 88 F-35 fighter jets and up to 16 new Boeing Poseidon 8 multi-mission aircraft. We're also investing in new drone capabilities, air-to-air refueling aircraft, and very much more. And in fact, just over the past 18 months, we've signed deals for approximately 140 new aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force. And these platforms, when delivered, are going to strengthen our contribution to continental defense, and they are going to enable much greater interoperability, compatibility, and even exchangeability with our allies in the United States. Because in this age of disruption and disorder, we need to be able to work seamlessly with all of our allies, and in particularly with America. Our technology needs need to fit together. We need to be able to communicate and make rapid decisions together. We need a united and integrated front. And frankly, this is what NORAD modernization is all about. But in addition to our responsibilities to NORAD, Canada also has significant responsibility to NATO. Right now, we are advancing our efforts in Europe to bolster NATO's eastern flank. We're scaling up the NATO multinational battle group that Canada leads in Latvia to a full-size brigade by 2026. I'm especially looking forward to being back in Washington this July for the NATO summit and the work that we will be doing together to further strengthen the alliance, to support our partners as we celebrate 75 years. We will continue to support Ukraine in its historic fight. Canada has committed nearly $14 billion in total aid to Ukraine, but we must keep going and we must do more. Right now, Canadian soldiers across Europe are training Ukrainian troops. And since 2015, we've trained nearly 40,000 Ukrainian Armed Forces members, and that work is going to continue every single day. We're going to keep supporting Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and their democracy, and we're going to find ways to respond to their urgent requirements for artillery ammunition and for air defense systems. And shifting our gaze around the world to the other side of the world, the Indo-Pacific region. Canada, like the United States, has significant interest in maintaining stability and security there. And as a Pacific nation ourselves, we believe this region will play an essential role in shaping Canada's future and prosperity. And therefore, we are investing in a more persistent military presence in the region. I now have 3 ships deploying to the Indo-Pacific each year to promote peace and stability, to uphold international law, and to demonstrate our resolve in the face of coercive behavior. And like the United States, Canada believes that China is seeking to reshape the rules-based international order to create an environment where we're more amenable, that is more amenable to their interests. These activities not only have the potential harm to Canadian and American interests, they threaten to disrupt wider global security and prosperity as well. All of these concerns are well described in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. And as we increase our presence in support of a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, we are always doing so in partnership and cooperation with the United States. Whether it's in the Indo-Pacific, our far north in the Arctic, or on NATO's eastern flank, Canadians and Americans work hand in hand across all domains because, quite frankly, Canada depends on the United States. And I believe the United States needs to be able to depend on Canada as well. And as we implement our new defense policy, we'll be doing this in partnership with the Canadian and U.S. defense industries and with you, our American friends. When we articulated our new defense policy, I also went back to our industry and said this is also industrial policy. We heard what you said you needed from us, and we've done our best to provide it. As we implement our new defense policy, we'll be working very closely with them and with our American allies. The threats facing Canada and the U.S. are evolving, and they are evolving rapidly. We're going to have to tackle these challenges head on, and we will be most successful if we do it together. And together, I'm very confident we can protect North America, we can defend our citizens and our territory, we can ensure a prosperous future for Canadians and Americans alike. I believe national security is very much a factor of national prosperity. We're going to make the investments necessary to ensure that for both our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Hi, my name is Ian Brzezinski, and I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And on behalf of the Atlantic Council, let me just say to the ambassador and to the embassy here, thank you so much for the privilege of co-hosting this event with you. And Mr. Minister, it's a real privilege to moderate this discussion with you. And welcome to Washington. You've been here many times before, but I think this is your first time in your capacity as Minister of National Defense.
Sir.
Thank you for sharing your insights on the priorities, the investment priorities, and the policy priorities of your new policy update, Our North, Strong and Free, and for your perspectives on the U.S.-Canadian defense relationship and the challenges before us. You know, there is no relationship, in my view, stronger and more reliable than that between Canada and the United States. And as you noted, the timing of your visit is outstanding because we're just approaching the Washington Summit, NATO's Washington Summit, that will be held here in this capital in July, less than 2 months from now. Now, before I jump in with some questions for you, let me just hit some housekeeping notes. This discussion, like your remarks, are on the record and are being live streamed by the Atlantic Council on all its platforms. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a few questions at you for a while, and then I'll open it up to the audience. And in the audience, you can see there are 2 microphones, and that's where you'll go if you want to throw a question at the Minister. So, Minister Blair, let me transition, if you will, to the first question, which I think is an easy one. You mentioned that you are here this morning with Secretary Austin. Tell us a little bit about what are the main outcomes of that discussion.
Well, thanks very much. And, you know, when the day I was appointed, I've had a number of ministerial positions within the Canadian government, most recently as the Public Safety Minister. But when I was appointed the Minister of National Defense, quite frankly, I'll share with you, when the Prime Minister called me into his office and said, I want you to take on responsibility for Canada's national defense, that's a job no man could say no to. And when Secretary Austin, when it was announced that I was moving in that position, Lloyd was one of the first people to call me. And he said, congratulations, you now have the hardest job in government. But he also told me you also have the best job in government. And he's been proven right over and over again during my brief tenure in that role. This morning, I went to see Secretary Austin. I was most interested in his feedback on some of the investments we've articulated in our new defense policy update. We also talked about the state of the world, some of the new and emerging challenges. We talked about Ukraine. We talked about the situation in the Caribbean and Haiti. We talked about the Indo-Pacific. We talked about the North, and we talked about the things that we have to do together. It was a great conversation. And, you know, one of the things that I've also come to really appreciate is Defense Secretary Austin has demonstrated remarkable leadership right around the world in bringing our NATO allies, but many others, to the table in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. And so a lot of our conversation was about the things that we need to do together and how we can do them better in order to support Ukraine, because in many respects, Ukraine is fighting for the rules-based order, which we've all come to depend and rely on. In many ways, they're fighting for all of us.
So you discussed with Secretary Austin your policy update. What's new and different in this policy update compared to the 2017 document?
Well, in 2017, we issued a defense policy at that time called Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And I think it contained some very important new investments that we knew Canada had to make, generational investments in fighter jets, in the acquisition of a new surface combatant fleet, some pretty significant new investments for both the air and our Air Force and the Navy and our armed forces that we needed to do. But we've acknowledged in this document that the world changed since 2017. We have seen a far more aggressive action on the part of those who would challenge that international rules-based order. Russia and China, as an example, are really emerging as quite willing to ignore those rules and to use might instead of, you know, what has been a national consensus on the way in which nations should conduct themselves. That's really being challenged. We also acknowledge that in my own country, climate change is having a pretty significant impact on our country. Our north is warming at about 4 times the global average. It's making Canada's Arctic far more accessible and of far more interest to our potential adversaries, particularly China and Russia again. And so it does require that we respond to that changing environment. And finally, what we've also seen over the past 4 or 5 years, certainly in the last 2, is the nature of conflict is rapidly evolving as well. You know, we witnessed it in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and how the importance of things like drone technology and missile defense have become so critically important. We've witnessed it most recently when Iran fired that remarkable salvo at Israel, and the importance of having the right capabilities for us to defend ourselves. And the last thing I would mention for me that was also a significant change is our relationship with our allies has really evolved. Russia's invasion of Ukraine made NATO stronger. It's brought new members, but it's also brought incredible unity and resolve among its members to make, first of all, the investments necessary to support Ukraine, but also to create a stronger alliance. And so all of those things together made it very clear Canada had to evolve in its approach. And if I may as well, I'm very mindful of our commitment to NATO to spend 2% of our budget on defense. But it's not just simply a matter of spending money. It's spending the money well. And, you know, these are taxpayer dollars. I think it's really important that we, you know, be able to articulate not just the what and how much, but the why. And we've really, through this document, attempted to articulate, frankly, what we perceive as the state of the world, the threats that we face, also our obligation to all of our allies, in particular the United States, NORAD, and NATO, our new responsibilities in the Indo-Pacific, and primarily, and I think that you'll see a great, strong focus in our document, on fulfilling our responsibilities to defend against new and emerging threats for North America, for our country and particularly for its Arctic approaches.
I want to hit you, of course, on 1.76%, but let me hit you on one thing that I think probably strikes many Americans as interesting. Your order of priorities, and you've mentioned it here, you just mentioned here in your discussion here, of threats are climate change, then Russia, then China. In the United States, bipartisan national security documents, the Trump administration, Biden administration, have come out with the order of China, Russia. NATO is Russia, China. They mention climate change. The Biden administration certainly is committed to climate change. But why is climate change a more urgent priority on the listing you give than Russia, which has a hot war against Ukraine, a war that could escalate, and higher than China, which has become increasingly belligerent? I recognize the importance of climate change as much as anyone, but why is that ahead of Russia and China?
Well, if I may, for Canada, I think climate change is making the threats that Russia and China represent to Western societies, to our way of life, to our values, becomes a little bit more personal and acute. Canada shares the largest maritime border with Russia of any country in the world. And I think for generations we've relied on the fact that that ocean is primarily frozen. It's ice covered and inaccessible, but it's becoming increasingly accessible. We're also seeing, and I sort of list my priorities, there's not a lot of distance between them, Ian. I think we're very concerned. Canada shares the United States' concern with the very aggressive and hostile activities of both Russia and China. Quite frankly, I see, the Russian threat to the eastern border of Europe, their actions in Ukraine is deeply concerning. But we are seeing a far more aggressive, assertive, and sophisticated approach from China that I think really does challenge our national and strategic interests. The change in climate is really making Canada's north far more accessible to those threats. And I think for me, it elevates my responsibility to step up and to do more in our north. Because, I think we have not been complacent, but I don't think we necessarily felt the urgency in defense of North America, because we have always been defended by distance and our proximity to the United States. Canada needs to do more. All of us need to do more. I've actually been really pleased at NATO because of the advent and ascent of Finland and Sweden into the NATO alliance. We now have a very strong contingent of NATO members who are Arctic nations. And focusing, as quite necessarily, we focus on the Eastern Front with Russia and Europe and the Baltic states, Poland and Romania, but we're also thinking about the potential threats that exist from the north and on our western flank. Canada has some responsibility that we're going to step up to it.
That's excellent to hear. But on 2%, and this is coming down, you've talked about the challenges you're facing in the north. You're facing increased challenges in the west and to the east. Is 1.76 by 2020, 1.76% of GDP by 2029 enough? Canada, for several years, has been a signatory to the commitment to bring its defenses up to 2%. Yet, you're going to wait another 5, 6, 7, 8 years before you not even hit 2%. You've got allies out there who are spending 2%, 2.5%, 4% in the case of Poland. What do you tell them? Did Secretary Austin press you on this?
Actually, I was able to explain to Secretary Austin the approach that I've taken in this new defense policy update. For a very long time, defense spending in Canada was even under the previous government below 1% of GDP. We recognized we needed to do more, and since I got this job, the very first day I got this job, I made very public statements that Canada recognizes we have to do more and we're going to do more. One of the things that may be a little challenging for us, but I've been able to explain to Secretary Austin and our allies, is when we publish our defense policy update, everything has to be funded. We book the money well in advance, and we've made those commitments to these investments. And I will tell you, it's a lot. My defense budget next year over this is going to go up 27%. So we've got a really strong upward projection of defense spending in Canada. But it can't be the end. I really believe we have to meet that defense commitment to NATO and to others of reaching 2%. But because I'm limited in putting in the document the things that we must or will do to those which are funded, everything I've spoken about that takes me to 1.76 is already, we have the funding committed. But I also included in this document discussion of a number of things that, quite frankly, Canada must do, that we are not yet ready to go. It's my job to go and make the case to my government about other expenditures that we must inevitably make. And for example, we've said in this document, and because it's not yet fully funded, I've said we're exploring it, but that work is well underway to determine what our Royal Canadian Navy is going to need to replace its aging submarine fleet. Like that's a underwater surveillance. Our responsibilities in the North Atlantic, in the Arctic, and in the Pacific are going to require significant new capabilities. As well, there are other investments not yet fully funded in this document that must inevitably occur for Canada to fulfill its obligations to our alliances and to our agreements. Now, we're making a significant investment, for example, in NORAD. But I know that that's going to necessitate additional investments in integrated air and missile defense for the continent. As well, we have other capabilities that we are required to provide to NATO. And so what I've been able to say to our allies is, this is a significant step forward, but I've got work to do. And we're doing that work now. I think the investments in, for example, a new submarine fleet will inevitably take Canada well beyond 2% of our GDP spending. But before I can secure that funding, we've got some work to do on my team to determine what our requirements are, to see what is available to meet those requirements, and then to be able to bring to government a clear path. This is what we need to do, and this is what we're going to need to do it, and then to secure that funding. So again, somebody said to me about the glass being half empty. It's 88% full. But I got some work to do. And I acknowledge that to Secretary Austin. I acknowledge it to my country and my fellow citizens. We've got more to do. We're committed to doing more. But one of the great challenges of being a defense minister is securing funding. And the second one is actually spending it. And you have to spend it well. These are taxpayer dollars. It requires that every dollar be looked at as an investment in the national interest. That's why we've talked about our responsibility within our own country. I also believe that national defense and security is very much tied to national prosperity. And so I still have some work to do to articulate the business case for the new capability requirements that Canada is going to need. But I am very confident, and I can assure our allies, Canada still has more to do, and we're going to do more.
On submarines, submarines are a platform that the alliance over the last 30 years has actually cut by 50% in its naval fleets. So there's an urgent and growing requirement for those submarines. And for Canada, I would imagine that could be an even more important contribution you could make to North Atlantic defense, thinking with NATO, for your role in the Indo-Pacific, and of course the protection, surveillance, and protection of your northern territories. How confident are you that Canada will launch a submarine replacement program?
I don't think it's a question of if. I think we have to do it. It is our responsibility, not just to our NATO and American allies. It's our responsibility in the defense of our own country. As our waterways, Canada actually has the largest coastline in the world, over 250,000 kilometers of coastline. And securing the naval environment is in our national interest, but also very much in the interest of our NATO, NORAD allies, and in the Indo-Pacific. We need it's not just, by the way, submarines. It's underwater sensors. It's like we've also just announced recently the acquisition of 16 new Poseidon P-8 multi-mission aircraft, which are essentially submarine hunters. They perform other functions, but that's really important. We're also investing in new AWACS capabilities to create better domain awareness. But I think submarines are becoming a vital strategic asset, and Canada needs to invest. Our current fleet is aging. We bought it secondhand in the late 90s. It's their Victoria class, good submarine in its day, but no longer fit for purpose. I've got to replace it. And so we're now beginning the important work of determining what will fit the bill for us. And then I have to secure the funding and work through with my officials a plan to do that. But I will also tell you, and as soon as I indicated in this document an interest and a commitment to pursue that, among many other things, quite a number of our allies have really stepped up and want to work very closely with us on that. And we see the strength of united purpose. We saw it with AUKUS, with Australia and the United Kingdom and America, for example. Coming together and finding ways to meet that commitment together I'm also quite keen to work with allies and with the AUKUS members on some of the next work that needs to be done.
Let me shift over to Europe. And you mentioned in your conversation with Secretary Austin, you talked about Ukraine. Do you believe the alliance is doing enough to support Ukraine today? Many, including myself, fear that the United States, Canada, and the allies have only provided enough to Ukraine for an able to survive rather than decisively defeat Russia's invasion on Ukraine's terms, decisively and swiftly. In a way, we're almost perpetuating this conflict, in a way that's grinding Ukraine down. Do you agree with that assessment? Is there more we can and should be doing to provide the Ukrainians the means for immediate success?
Yeah, can I just share with you that I think that we always need to find better and more urgent responses to Ukraine's real needs. We want to make sure that, I think we have to be in this until Ukraine's victory, and ultimately to create a secure and peaceful situation for that country. One of the things, for example, as I mentioned in my remarks, Canada made an early and pretty significant financial commitment to support Ukraine. But one of the things that I'm finding a little bit challenging is, we keep on announcing supports, but it's taking too long to deliver those capabilities that they urgently require. I was on the phone last week with Rustin Umerov, their defense minister, and the week before in a conversation with President Zelensky. They made their urgent requirements very well known to all of us. And we've tried really hard to respond to that. For example, their need for ammunition. Russia has really significantly upped their production. And through force of arms, artillery, and personnel, they're really putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Ukrainians today. And so the Ukrainians said they needed desperately ammunition. All of our allies in Canada too have really gone to the well and more or less emptied our own stocks. We need to increase productivity for that ammunition, but it's taking too long. And so I entered into an agreement with the Czechs, for example, because they said that they could find a way to acquire those munitions and deliver them within weeks and months rather than years. And so we'll pursue that path. Last week, Zelensky and Umerov both said their desperate need right now was missile defense. And so, primarily under Secretary Austin's leadership, a whole bunch of us have sort of stepped forward. I just met last week with the German defense minister, and they've established a consortium that's going to enable us. I'm giving them $76 million to buy those air defense missiles that Ukraine says it needs. It would take me a very long time to procure them through my own processes. And so I'm taking advantage of the willingness of allies to step up and help, and we're putting money into that. So we're finding different ways to support Ukraine. I think there's also important discussions now taking place at NATO and in Europe and with involving the United States and Canada about what are the next steps and what additional things we can do to bring this to a peaceful resolution, victory for Ukraine, and also the cessation of hostility.
Do you think the slowness in that delivery of assistance has been driven by Putin's ability to effectively deter us from providing that more effective assistance?
I think it's more than fair to acknowledge that among particularly for those of our allies in Europe, those who particularly have a close proximity or share a border with Russia, that the intimidation of possibly implicating NATO into this conflict is a strong factor that people are considering. And at the same time, there is a pretty important discussion taking place about how we can do more and the fact that we must do more. But we're also making sure that what we do does not bring us into wider conflict, but leads us closer to peace.
Mm-hmm. Now, this, of course, will be one of the issues at the upcoming NATO summit here in Washington. What are your objectives? What are Canada's objectives in the summit? How do you define success for NATO's 75th anniversary summit?
Yeah, well, there's a number of things, and certainly I will, and with my Prime Minister, we'll be going to the summit to talk about some of the things that we have done, but I think the more important conversation is about the future. It's about what we have to do next. There are some things that I think represent a threat to all of our national interests that are deeply concerning for me, and I'll just give you an example. Supplying secure supply lines for our military industry is really critical. There are 31 critical minerals that are available in the world, and right now, the vast majority of those minerals and their processing is controlled by one nation. And that one nation, China, is rather adversarial to our interests. And what we've seen just most recently, for example, when Germany and other countries in Europe had to wean themselves from dependence on Russian energy sources, I think that's a good lesson for us on what we need to do to make sure that we wean ourselves from dependence on one potentially adversarial country, to make sure that we secure the supply of critical minerals, energy, and other important parts of our industries and our critical infrastructure, that we secure that, and we have the strength of our alliances. We can do that with each other and for each other, and doing it together, I think will be the right approach. So that's, I've been thinking a lot about how to make our alliance even stronger. As I said, I've been really quite inspired by how the war in Ukraine has really united the Europeans and America and Canada into that alliance. I think we are stronger as a result, but it also highlights for us, we've got a lot of work to do. It's one of the reasons in this document, I've articulated it very much as industrial policy, because I've gone to our own industry and said, what do you need from me? Because I have a great deal of things I need from you. And they were really clear on what they needed. They needed clarity. They needed certainty from me on where we were going, what we were going to require. And they need the certainty of long-term contracts. It's one of the things we've tried to provide in this document that wasn't perhaps available to us in our previous policies.
Well, I think, one thing that Ukraine has demonstrated to us, the war in Ukraine has demonstrated to us, is a lack of preparedness of our defense industrial base. And it's easy to blame defense industry for that, but it's, I would say, an even more important responsibility of government to drive that transformation of defense industry.
Yeah, I'm not at all inclined to blame industry. I think it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared obligation. Well, say we need industry to respond, but industry also needs something from us. They need that clarity as to what we are going to require. They need the certainty of what we need to invest in. There is remarkable innovators, and industry has always been an important partner in this. But I think we all share a concern about its ability to quickly adapt to a changing environment. But at the same time, I think that adaptation, that innovation, can be better supported by all governments in being clear, in providing both clarity and the certainty. I'll give you an example. I went to my ammunition production industries, said, I really need you to up your game. I need you to create new production lines. I need you to secure new supply chains. I'm going to need you to deliver more and faster. And they said, okay, but we need two things from you. We need investment in those new production lines. I've gone and secured the money in this new policy update to help them with that. But they also need the certainty of long-term contracts. And so, again, you'll see close to $10 billion that we've articulated in our document, so that I can go to industry and say, okay, I've got the money. Let's sit down and talk about increasing your production and then creating those dependable supply chains for our industry requirements. Letting people know where you're going, what you plan to do, and providing them with, they're going to make business decisions. We've got to give them the certainty that they require in order to make the decisions that are going to support what we need to do.
I'm going to throw one more question to the Minister, and then I'd like to open the floor up to those of us in the audience. So I'd encourage you to go to one of the mics, and I'll give you a chance for a question to the Minister. Let me go back to Ukraine and the NATO summit.
Yep.
I really believe that the defining issue is going to be Ukraine at this summit. It's going to define whether or not this is a summit that inspires confidence about the alliance's political will to defend, to deter, and to defend. And I say that because I think of NATO's advantages over Russia. We got $52 trillion in GDP to less than $2 trillion of GDP in Russia. That's more than 25 times. We've got $1.3 trillion in defense spending to Russia's, 88 to 100 billion dollars. So more than 10 times. And we know that Canadian, U.S., French, Polish armed forces are better trained, better equipped, and higher morale than Russians. And it really begs the question as to how is it that the alliance is unable to give Ukraine the tools and the support necessary for it to, end this war on its terms quickly and decisively. Are you worried about what this state of the war is signaling about the alliance's political will?
I can share with you that I am very much seized by the urgency that Ukraine has communicated to us about their current situation and the need to do more. I also, from the first day I was appointed to this, and I have been, frankly, really encouraged by the strength and unity within the NATO room. I know that there are always differences of opinion on priorities and how to approach this, but everybody's doing more. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to keep up and to therefore do more. But I think as well, I think NATO's response, first of all, I think Putin made a terrible mistake. I think with the invasion of Ukraine, I would say even more than indifference to NATO, I think he underestimated NATO very significantly. And he woke NATO up. And not that they were sleeping, I want to be careful with that, but he really did remind all of us of the need to do more. I think many of us were still cashing in what we call the peace dividend. You know, the end of the Cold War, and as a consequence, in countries right across Europe and in my country, defense spending actually just fell below what it was required. Putin has reminded us of the need to do more, and Ukraine, I think, has given us a valiant example on how, you know, a brave and valiant people with appropriate support can prevail against what many would have considered, I think all of us, when that war first broke out in February of 22, we all thought weeks. We were wrong, and the Ukrainians proved us wrong. And I think we proved ourselves wrong too, because we all started to step up pretty significantly. And you know, I think that lesson has been well learned for Canada, but among all our allies, that we are stronger together and that we need to do more. I think it's re-energized a new conversation with our own industries. It's energized a new conversation among allies. It's encouraged us to collaborate more, to cooperate more, to work together better. And one of the things that I've been really involved in is the new enhanced deployments in the Baltics. The United Kingdom is in Estonia. We're in Latvia. Germany's in Lithuania. One of the things that we have seen there is like, for us in Latvia, over 10 countries have come to join that coalition. We're learning how to work together. We're learning how to collaborate and to cooperate. And you know, when we first got there, our radios didn't really talk to each other, and you know, we used different ammunition for our artillery pieces. We're pulling all that together. That work is well underway. We're making a really significant investment in Latvia, but it's also given me an opportunity. It's given me an opportunity to use urgent operational requirements to acquire the things that my armed forces need. And so I'm not telling you I'm taking advantage of it, but I am taking advantage of it. This is a situation where we are really struck by urgency, and urgency sometimes is a good thing, you know, to raise us from our slumber and to really start to focus on the things we need to do and we need to do well. And quite frankly, for me, it's also, I've learned a lot from talking to my NATO allies, particularly the Nordic ones, about fulfilling my responsibilities in the High North. And I can see a vulnerability there that has to be responded to. So we're going to respond.
Let me throw one more question to the minister, and I'll turn to my colleague over there. But on NATO, do you think it would be appropriate and wise for NATO to play more of a role? NATO, the institution, its allies are supporting Ukraine, but NATO is a half step away, full step away from that conflict as an institution. Could you imagine, would it be useful for NATO to play a role in directly equipping the Ukrainians, perhaps in training on Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian soldiers, guiding their or advising their exercises, perhaps sending a NATO team to provide to the general staff in Kiev to provide military advice?
We've had those conversations at NATO. Most recently, President Macron convened a summit where we talked about some of those issues as well. Let me say, for example, since 2015, Canada was in Ukraine. And we were there right up until 2022, and we've been training the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Over 40,000 members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces trained by Canadians in Ukraine. But then when the war broke out in 2022, we moved some of that training back to Poland or into the United Kingdom, some of it in Canada, some of it in other places in Europe. But one of the things that we have had a discussion of that I think is really interesting, and I'm quite confident we're going to have more of this discussion when we return in July to Washington, it was first actually an idea floated by the United States, but that has been adopted by the Secretary General, which I support, is the establishment of a Ukraine NATO mission that wouldn't necessarily be located in Ukraine, because there are a number of issues related to that, but would bring training and other supports in closer proximity to Ukraine so that we can respond more quickly and more effectively to the urgent needs of that country. There have been discussions as to whether or not we would deploy troops in Ukraine, but quite frankly, I think the circumstances would have to be substantially different than they are today. I'm quite open, however, to continue to work with allies to find the best way to respond. There are a number of different proposals and initiatives. I think one of the things that we need to make sure that we do is create an alignment of effort. Alignment of effort bilaterally between all of the allies and Ukraine. The work that we do within the NATO umbrella, some of the work that's also being done within the EU umbrella. And then we have what we call capability coalitions, where a number of countries are working together on things like aircraft, air defense, drones, armament, artillery, and other things. And so what we need to do is make sure, and I think this is, again, the strength of NATO. The leadership in NATO is really quite remarkable in this regard. To bring a greater alignment in those efforts, I think we need to be more effective in supporting Ukraine. And I've seen some really brilliant work that's been done, but I think we also see that more needs to be done, and we're going to do it.
Let me turn to our colleague on the floor there. If I could ask people, one question, encourage others to come up. Please give us your name, your affiliation, and keep your question or point concise.
And the answer probably won't be, by the way, but
I think I can do that. Good afternoon, Minister, Ambassador. Thank you for having us. My name is Jordan Law, the Defense Fellow for Senator Cardin, Senate Foreign Relations Chair. You spoke to what the One North policy is and why it's necessary. My question is about the how. How can the new One North strategy and the now almost 3-year-old U.S. national defense strategy align their shared goals to integrated deterrence, and what can we, the U.S., do to assist Canada in ensuring that they can fully implement their new defense goals?
yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, as we've indicated, Canada has, for 68 years now, we celebrated our anniversary yesterday, been in, I think, one of the most extraordinary bilateral defense arrangements between any two countries in the world, NORAD. And we've made a commitment to, both of us, to very significant investments in NORAD modernization. But part of that commitment just wasn't merely a commitment of funding. It was a commitment to work together, to share information, to ensure that the systems are fully integrated, seamless, because that is our shared responsibility to the North American continent, is to provide that defense. And I think there's lessons in that I want to build upon. I had the opportunity, for example, to go down and have a conversation in Colorado Springs with the commanding general of NORAD. We talked about the work we have to do together. But I've also talked about, for example, the resources that the United States has deployed in Alaska. There is also a bit of a gap, in my opinion, between Alaska and Greenland. That's my responsibility. And so I intend to work very closely with the United States, frankly, to seek their advice and their support to build out a stronger, more persistent capability for the Canadian Armed Forces in our Arctic so that we can fulfill our responsibilities to first of all, to the United States, through that relationship, to create a strong, united, and integrated front to face the challenges that both Russia and China are presenting to us in that region. And then as well, I think there's a great opportunity to become more integrated with other Arctic nations, because we all have that responsibility. And again, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think climate change, the advance in technologies and some of the adversarial actions of our potential adversaries has really drawn us to a requirement that we step up, that we respond appropriately. And I believe very strongly Canada has a responsibility to the Americans, but also to our own country, to strengthen continental defense. And I think the best way to do that is together. And frankly, the United States has always been strong in the North. Canada just simply needs to be stronger to join them.
We go to my left. Sir?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm George Benitez, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council.
Sure.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Sir, I wanted to thank you for the comments you've made. We may not always agree with the things we're discussing, but we do appreciate your honesty and the fact that you speak to your neighbors in truth. I also want to thank you for what Canada has been doing for Ukraine. We appreciate the valuable contribution you're making, not only to protect democracy in Ukraine, but the democracy also of our NATO allies and also democracy on this continent. In addition to that, though, I do want to share some concerns that your allies have. In particular, you make a very persuasive case. You bring good evidence that China that Canada is improving and making incremental changes. But to American ears, it still sounds like you're not meeting the Wales Pledge of 2024, and you don't plan to meet it in 6 years by 2030, that you're still promising that you're going to underperform on those things. So my question is, you've shown us that some of the threat perception is changing in Canada. You're making incremental changes. How can our allies here in the United States and elsewhere in NATO see that there are changes in Canada's threat perception that are keeping up with the new security environment, which you made a very good case for? As you said, Canada has a long maritime border with Russia, that for years Russia has been militarizing. And also, you have China that's declared itself a near-Arctic nation and has specifically targeted Canada with diplomatic, political, information, economic, and cyber warfare against your country. How can we see that your political parties and your voters are responding with the right defense capabilities to meet this new security environment? Thank you, sir.
Thanks, George.
George, thank you. And I think it is the question that I have to respond to. First of all, so I got this job. When the Prime Minister asked me to take on this ministry, he said, Bill, go get things done. Because quite frankly, I think we're both tired of announcements and good intentions and aspirations. We just got to go get things done. And so in this document, I have been able to present significant new investments. And quite frankly, since we formed government, a doubling of defense expenditure, and by 2029, tripling of our defense expenditure. But I also try to acknowledge as candidly as I can to everybody, Canada is going to do more, but we have to do more again to meet that. And it's not just, and I say this respectfully, I support the Wales commitment, the 2%. My Prime Minister has been very public that he is committed to reaching that goal. I think we share that. But as well, it's very difficult sometimes to convince governments or even your citizenry to meet a mathematical formula. So what I've tried to do is articulate not just the what and how much, but the why. The why is critically important for us. And in this document, I think you can see, I've tried to really articulate why we have to make these investments. I've also, as I say, I'm a little bit constrained in Canada. We won't put anything in our document that we're going to do until it's fully funded. Frankly, this is a pretty significant investment for my country in defense spending. It's great, it's just not there yet. And so I've also tried to articulate, I've got more to do. And I know I've got more to do, and I'm going to do that work. Like, I'm absolutely committed to do it. I believe Canadians also understand that we need to do more, but they're not 100% yet convinced as to what we need to do. And I've also got to let them know how much it's going to cost. But it is a significant new investment. I believe Canada has always answered the call. You know, but the vast majority of what we have done historically as a nation is expeditionary. We go somewhere else. We've gone to Europe. We've fought in both world wars. We've been in Iraq. We've been in the Middle East. We've been on all sorts of peacekeeping missions. We always say yes when someone asks us to come and help. But what we're dealing with now is the world is, as I've just articulated to you, has become an increasingly challenging and dangerous place. We're going to have to do more. And then we have this new threat environment on our own shores, in our own Arctic. You know, one of the things that Canadians have told me is Arctic sovereignty, our domain over our own country, isn't predicated on a plane flying by once in a while or a boat going by when the ice is out. It's about infrastructure, and it's about people, and it's about creating military capability. Those require investments, significant new investments. And so we've told that story. I'm very confident. I'll just simply share with you. I'm very confident Canada knows what it needs to do. And we're well on the path to doing all the hard work that will be necessary for me to go back to my finance department, to me to go back to Canadians and say, okay, here's the next step. Here's the investments we've said we're going to have to make, and now we're ready to make them. And those investments, I'm very confident, will bring us to the 2% threshold. But it's not just about spending money. It's about spending money well. It's about investing it in real capability and producing a real return on that investment, which is in our national interest, in our strategic interest around the world. And so that's the work that is still before me. Frankly, I'm a little bit chuffed about the fact that, you know, we've got a lot of opportunity now in this document and a ton of work left to do.
Mr. Blair, do you have time for 2 more questions? Or I don't want to be pressing your time. All right, sir, we got 2 more.
I'm General Boris Kremetsky, Ukrainian Defense Attaché.
Sir.
First of all, thank you very much for support Canada provides to Ukraine. It's impossible to overestimate its value and importance for Ukraine. And my question about the following. We've had during these 2 years saying that we will support Ukraine as long as it takes. We will support Ukraine as long as we can. You mentioned for the first time from this political level, you will support till Ukraine victory. What does it mean for you, Ukraine's victory? And what does it mean, Russians' failure? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's an important question. When I got this job, frankly, I changed our language. That, because as long as it takes is not very hopeful or even aspirational to victory. And in my opinion, victory is strong, secure borders for Ukraine, but also for Ukrainians, so that they can live in peace and prosperity. And so for me, victory is defeating Putin, obviously, and driving him out of Ukraine, but it's also creating the circumstances that will allow for a lasting, secure peace for the Ukrainian people.
Thank you very much. Kick them out from Ukraine, that is what I wanted to hear.
Here, here.
I know that's what you want. Cover Ukraine.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ben Mermel. I'm with the Center for Warfare Analysis and Evaluation, which is a new national security research project at American University here in the district. My question to you is that history doesn't really repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. We're seeing like an unprecedented level of isolationism, particularly in democracies that are a bit removed from the front line in Eastern Europe. What's the pitch that you make to voters when they say, why send our money to Ukraine? Why send our money to Israel? It's a conversation here in Capitol Hill, in DC, that's sort of very hard to be responsive to. So I was curious, what's the Canadian perspective?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's still very strong support for Ukraine and Ukrainian people in my country. We have a very large Ukrainian population, but even well beyond that. That argument would be particularly compelling for people of that descent, but for all Canadians. We've characterized the fight in Ukraine as not just simply the illegal invasion of one country by a bigger country. It really is fundamentally a challenge to the rules-based order that we have all relied on to keep peace and ensure safety around the globe for almost 80 years. There are, the rules that we have all agreed to on how countries will deal with each other and live together in peace and prosperity have all been predicated on respect for sovereign borders. And it challenges this notion that might somehow can make right. When we are coming to the assistance and aid of Ukraine, it's an acknowledgement Ukraine is not just fighting for their survival, they're fighting for all of us. They're fighting for that rules-based order that has kept us all safe. They're also, I think Canada understands, as it always has, its responsibility to our allies. We believe in multilateralism. We believe in support for countries that share our values. We have signed on to those commitments, and we have bled on those battlefields. And so that's a really important part of our values. And our tradition is to be there for your allies wherever they're required. And so, quite frankly, I think what Canadians really need to hear from me is that commitment, which I believe they share, but also then how we are going to invest their hard-earned taxpayer dollars in delivering on that commitment. And that includes increasing the strength and capability of the Canadian Armed Forces, but it also, they have every expectation of us that we will work smart with our allies, that we'll be in close collaboration, that we'll seize the opportunity that collaboration and synergy that is created among allies. That's my country's expectation. We are a country that really does, I think, embrace multilateralism and our responsibilities to those relationships.
Thank you.
Minister Blair, thank you for your time. Let me throw one last question, perhaps as part of maybe your final remarks to this group. And we've been asking a lot of Canada in this discussion. When you came here to Washington, is there anything you were asking of us, of the United States, of Secretary Austin, that you'd like to see the United States and Canada do more together, perhaps in the Arctic, perhaps in the Indo-Pacific, in the defense realm, or perhaps somewhere else?
Well, I will tell you quite candidly, one of the things I came to speak to Secretary Austin about is I'm asking for his help. because I've got a big job to do in building out for the Canadian Armed Forces significantly enhanced defense capabilities in Canada. We also have significant investments and we want to take advantage of the opportunity. Canada has some remarkable expertise that I think can be helpful to our allies. I wanted to make sure that our allies know about that capability and expertise so that we can share it. For example, we're having discussions about the second pillar of AUKUS and things that Canada, I believe, can make a very real contribution to in AI and in quantum computing. But there as well, there are things that I'm going to have to do. Building out a new integrated air and missile defense requires a good partner. Fortunately, I'm blessed with one, which is the United States. And so they've got some extraordinary capabilities. I've just got to build out my part of that so that I can be there for them when they require it. Like I said, I've asked for help, but I have every expectation it'll be there. There's a remarkable relationship between my Canadian Armed Forces and the U.S. Armed Forces. We work together, we train together, we often operate side by side. I've got Canadian generals integrated in almost every command center around the world. That's a relationship we really rely on, but I've tried to be really candid with our partners too. We've got a ton of work to do. We've got a lot of investments that we're going to have to make to bring in more people, to bring in more capability, to acquire new technologies in order to fulfill the responsibilities that I've tried to articulate in this document. I think we'll be far more successful in doing that. And for me, we'll also produce better value for Canadian taxpayer dollars if we do it together. If we do it, I think Canadians will be more confident in the investments we've got to make if they see that we're not sort of just going on our own, but it's part of a broader plan. That is that multilateral relationship that exists in NATO, in NORAD, and emerging soon in the Indo-Pacific.
Minister Blair, thank you for your time. Thank you for all that Canada is doing for Ukraine, for Canada's deployments to Europe in Latvia and the other contributions to the alliance. And thank you for your leadership in the U.S.-Canadian defense relationship. It's really important and greatly appreciated here. And let me thank the ambassador for her hospitality. Thank you all.